Hello, everybody. I think we're going to get this meeting going here. I call the CSRIC meeting to order, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Jeff Goldthrope.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's good to see you all here again. I keep wanting to say good morning because for years and years, these meetings started at 9 o'clock. Remember? It's kind of nice having them start at 1, I have to say. This meeting today, there'll be no votes today. As we said before, these are status reports of each of the working groups, and each working group will present their status. The meeting will probably be over a little bit early, probably be over, I'll say close to 3, but I won't promise that. So with that, we'll get started. Thanks again for coming, and I'll turn it over now to Larissa.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending today's CSRIC Council meeting. I look forward to getting a readout today from the working groups. I think you'll find the working groups have made tremendous progress in a very short time across the various initiatives. The working groups are staffed and have been meeting regularly to develop their recommendations, but we still have a lot of work to do. Over the next couple of years, we'll have a tremendous opportunity to develop critical recommendations to the FCC that will influence and shape the way our industry operates. This is a big job. So it's an incredible challenge. I know everyone's up for it and working very hard, and I want to thank everybody for attending today and for all the hard work that's going on behind the scenes. I'd like to now turn it over to Chairman Wheeler for his remarks, and thank him for taking the time with us today.
Thank you, Larissa, and thank you to all of you for the contributions that you're making. You know, CSRIC, everybody talks about CSRIC did this, CSRIC did that, and CSRIC has been for so long in a leadership role in very many important issues, and thank you for your involvement, and thank you for the kinds of things that you continue to do. Larissa, thank you for your leadership of the entire activity. And Mike, where'd Mike go? There's Mike hiding back here. Okay, for your work on the working group. And I hope that you all have had a chance to meet Admiral Dave Simpson, who I am just really excited and proud that this outstanding public servant, and yes, great American, would agree to come and join us and fight the fight for the kinds of things that we believe in here at the Commission. As you know, before Admiral Simpson came, he was the deputy of DISA. He procured the world's largest telecom networks and facilities. I think that kind of qualifies him for the things that we're talking about. But also he was very, very involved and on the cutting edge of cybersecurity for the Defense Department and our nation. And as I'll reflect in a minute, we've got some serious cyber challenges that I know you at CSRIC have been addressing, and that I want to encourage your expansive thinking and activity on. But let me share with you 2 operational philosophies. One is that we have been talking a lot in the last month about what I call the network compact. For a century, there has been implicit and explicit values reflected in the relationship between those who build networks, those who operate networks, and those who use networks. The transition to IP is going to change the way those networks operate, but it should not change the values. We may have different ways of reaching the same value through different voluntary activity, through different regulatory activity, because of the different nature of the network, but the value remains unchanged. And front and center in those values are security and public safety. Section 1 of the Act is all about public safety, as you know. Congress could not have been more explicit in its placement, saying the responsibility of the commission, the responsibility of networks is public safety, and therefore the work that you've been doing on NG 911, on denial of service, on the whole issue, the whole raft of issues associated with long-term changes in IP are all crucial and all part of this network compact. The second philosophy is that the multi-stakeholder process makes a lot of sense, and makes more sense, even more sense today. And that's what you all are. This is the multi-stakeholder process, live and in real time. Getting the people who are involved around the table reaching consensus on what needs to be done is nimble, it's fast, and it's far preferable to the five of us sitting up there on the dais and banging a gavel and say, "Thus shall it be." But within those two philosophies, there is also embedded a concept that a great mentor of mine once described as, you got to inspect what you expect. And so agreeing to network values and agreeing to a multi-stakeholder process that enunciates those values is a great first step, but it is not the end of the trip. Because discussing, agreeing, putting on paper is not implementation. And implementation is a metric-driven issue, a metric-driven measurement of how effectively the kinds of ideas everybody can agree on actually become practice. We have seen successes come out of this body. Your predecessor, Enric, developed the standards for SS7 in the 90s. And it defined the nature of our networks. We've also seen failure of this exact same approach. When CSRIC came forward and said, here's the kinds of 911 backup that ought to be in place, and everybody said, yay and verily, and then it takes the 2012 derecho to prove that it wasn't being reflected in actual behavior. And on the 12th of this month, the FCC will respond with the only choice that we have on this, and we will step in and regulate. I'd much rather that it was working, but we're going to have to step in because the kind of idea that was put forward was ignored. And because of the lack of metrics, it was impossible to know that. I have repeatedly been talking about what I call the seesaw rule. And the seesaw rule is really simple. The more successful the industry is in doing the kinds of things we all agree on, the less the FCC needs to regulate. But the seesaw goes both ways. And I want to be supportive, and I know Dave Simpson wants to be supportive, of the idea that we would rather the multi-stakeholder process deliver results than us have to step in and use our imperfect wisdom. And one of the more important areas in this, and that I've been really pleased to see CSRIC's leadership on, is the issue of cyber. For the last 3 years, for the first part of the Obama administration, I was privileged to be on the President's Intelligence Board. And you might say that I've seen cyber from both ends. That infuses me and us at the Commission with the crucial importance of securing our networks. I mean, a 911 call can't go through if a network is compromised by cyber attacks. The reliance that our economy has on safe and secure networks can't happen if they're exposed to cyber attacks. Your leadership on this has been significant. What you did on botnets, what you did on DNSSEC, what you did on router security are all important kinds of goals. And one of the things that Admiral Simpson and I have been talking about is then how do we move from there to that next phase that I was mentioning, which is the metrics. How do we know that in fact these are working? What do we learn as we develop metrics and measure against metrics that can help us make it better? Because we know for damn sure that the bad guys aren't sitting still. And so we shouldn't be sitting still. We should be constantly monitoring ourselves and asking ourselves the question, is this good enough? Is this good enough? So our joint challenge, and I think the challenge that, if I may presume for Dave Simpson, the challenge that was able to get us to convince Dave that he would want to come here and spend the next part of his illustrious career here at the FCC. Our joint challenge is to apply the multi-stakeholder approach to public safety and to cyber for the purpose of delivering measurable results. And I know that Larissa and all of you are dedicated to the proposition that we need to have a vibrant public safety structure, that we need to have a secure series of networks. And I just want to say that Dave Simpson and I and the whole team here at the FCC are dedicated to doing whatever we need to do to help you. And we're also dedicated to being the cattle prod to say, hey, we need to be doing some more of this. We need to be looking in this area because it's a big responsibility that we all have collectively. So Larissa and all of you, thank you very much for the contributions you're making. Thank you for the time and the sacrifices you make being here and in the working groups. And I look forward to seeing what comes from your efforts. Thank you.
After that introduction, I feel like I just want to leave and go tweet to my kids that Chairman Wheeler said something nice about me. It is great to be here, and I'm excited to be in the job and really see this as a natural culmination of a career's worth of experience in and around communities, albeit military organization communities that go all the way from family communities up to a city of 5,000 people on an aircraft carrier that also has an airfield, that also has a fire department, to communications across the country of Iraq under stress. In the last job I had at DISA in managing, operating, procuring, securing the Department of Defense's global network, it really has allowed me to see parts of the end-to-end capabilities that really give a holistic, that punctuate the holistic nature, the interconnected nature of what it takes to deliver these capabilities. Larissa, thanks for your leadership as chair here. This CSRIC 4 is already off to a great start and really good feedback on the topics that you've identified and the work of the subgroups. All of the industry and government leaders here, it's amazing to see the brainpower in this room right now, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing, as the chairman said, what this group can produce on its watch to help us advance the public interest in this regard, but also the consumer and community interest, because I really believe, and what I've seen time and time again, that the win-win is the real strength in how we go forward. And I think if we recognize that communications is no longer just an enabler for other elements of our national strength, communications is a national strength. It's a national strength for our economy. It's a natural strength for our society and all the good things that come from a commitment to free speech, to access up and down the social spectrum. And it's a cultural strength as the rest of the world looks upon us as the example, the pinnacle for how one manages this complex ecosystem. So I'm looking for the kind of win-win solutions that you all are going to bring together out of the working groups. I also believe, and the chairman alluded to it, that the velocity of technology change continues to increase. We're just seeing things before that would be a decade-long kind of effort emerge in years to months. I remember in my last job, we at DISA would do the security technical implementation guides, the STIGs. So you all would develop a device or a capability, and we wouldn't let anybody in DoD use it on our networks until we did a year or years kind of technical evaluation of the vulnerabilities and then how we should configure it to use it in our networks. We about 2 years ago recognized that a user organization asked for us to look at a device. We shrunk that down to 9 months. We developed a STIG. That device was off the market in less than 9 months because they were on to the next thing. The velocity of change has increased and will continue to increase. So will the commission be able to be effective as we go forward using mechanisms that wait until 3 or 4 years of public introduction to a technology, a couple of failures, and then we look at the potential remediation? We very much need to better align what the commission can do for those win-wins with the industry and with the public we serve to have those result in national strength. Metrics are a key piece of that, and I think we can do much better than we have in the past with very arbitrary reporting to FCC in a manner that really has got to be burdensome to industry, that if we can get the right information sharing rules in place, get the right protections, both proprietary and personal, to that we should be able to improve upon the use of metrics and big data to really get to the win-win. Your agenda today, I know you're going to be reviewing Next Gen 911, emergency alerting, cybersecurity. What is the right role of the CSRIC in ensuring that as we march an IP transition to all the eggs in that one IP basket, that we're building a pretty good basket, that we've brought in the right security and haven't exposed ourselves to vulnerabilities we'd regret later. Submarine cable landing stations, infrastructure sharing, the powering for critical nodes, and legacy communications issues. That's a diverse set, but they all play a role in that complex ecosystem and the interconnected nature of it. In turn, however, getting this right will promote economic growth and help keep Americans safer. It's that alignment that we seek. Thank you all for taking on this responsibility and dedicating your time and expertise to the effort. I know it's a part-time job for each of you. Your recommendations are very important to the FCC, but more important to the nation. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your progress as you succeed. Thanks. I'll turn it back to Larissa.
Thank you, Admiral. All right, so before we get on with our working group presentations and discussions, I'm going to do a quick roll call for those who are on the bridge, so we know who's there and we know we have a quorum. And the first thing I'd also like to ask are those of you who are on the bridge, can you please mute your lines? We'd appreciate that. So as I call your name, for those of you who are on the bridge, if you could just say "I" or "here," that would be great. I'm going to go through it real quickly. And if I mess up your pronunciation of your name, I apologize in advance. Elise Kim. Craig Spetzel. Michael Mosher. Oh, they're on mute. Well, if you you need to go off mute for this, folks. So we'll start again. Elise, Craig, Michael, James Lenow, John Madden. Are we supposed to hear something?
We usually do.
Okay.
Some of them are on the bridge.
Moran Nazari, Matthew Rantanen, William Sholey. I'm sorry? Yeah, that's right, Bueller. Ann Miles, Michael O'Riordan, Howard Brown, Robert Ozzie. I don't think I've ever taken a roll call where no one showed up. So there must be something wrong.
Some of them are definitely.
Excuse me?
Yeah, because I've got emails from some.
Oh, you got emails from them? Okay. All right. We'll send an email if you're on the bridge to Jeff.
Yeah.
That's one way we can take roll call since this clearly isn't working.
No, I think they are because
No,
they've been sending
they are. They're
emails.
sending emails. Okay. Let's move on. All right. So the first item on the agenda is NG 911. Brian and Lori were going to give us an update.
I'll start it out. Before we begin, it's the slides going to be up there. Bueller? No, I'm just kidding. Hey, Dan, are they? Jeff? No, back there. I just want to know if they were going to. We can go on, and the slides will catch up. First off, before we begin, I just wanted to thank everybody for the participation in this working group. But in addition to this working group, there's a lot of work being done in the standards bodies around town that address some of the issues associated with 911, Next Generation 911. I want to thank certainly NINA, my organization, but also ADIS, TIA for the work they're doing as well. In March of this year, ADIS, TIA adopted the joint ADIS, TIA native SMS to 911 requirements and architecture specifications document defining the requirements, architecture, and procedures for text messaging to 911 emergency services using native wireless operator texting capabilities for the existing generation of and also for next generation 911 PSAPs. The standard, however, does not address the following areas, which may be subject to the FCC's ongoing text to 911 rulemaking. So the first thing that we're looking at is location determination. The ATIS-TIA standard specifies the provision of cell site and sector location information. The working group will study and report on the technical feasibility of wireless carriers to include E911 Phase 2 location accuracy information in text sent to 911 and make recommendations for including enhanced location information in the text to 911. The report from this working group, because of the furlough or the government shutdown, is now moved to March of 2014. The next one will be addressing the issue of PSAP requests for service. Again, in this report that ATIS put out in March, the standard assumes that PSAPs will designate the text to 911 delivery method to the PSAP, including type of delivery method or an alternative PSAP that will accept messages on behalf of the PSAP, or that the PSAP itself will not support texting at all. The ATIS-TIA standard does not provide a mechanism for supporting this functionality and indicates that this is an area of future study. In the May 2013 report and order that the Commission adopted on texting to 911, establishing the bounce-back requirements on the covered text providers, the Commission requires wireless carriers to provide a mechanism for PSAPs to notify the carrier to temporarily suspend text to 911 service and to restart the text to 911 services. So the subgroup is also dealing with the PSAP requests for services, how this is going to be handled. The working group will recommend best practices, including testing, trialing, operational procedures, and security requirements that wireless carriers, public safety answering points, or PSAPs, and third-party service providers should allow in provisioning PSAP requests for text to 911 service. The deadline for this report is also March 2014. Laurie?
Thank you, Brian. So the first overall objective of Working Group 1 has to do with text to 911. Our second objective has to do with location accuracy and testing for voice over long-term evolution networks, or LTE networks. Just in terms of background, the current FCC location accuracy requirements under Section 20.18 permit network-based carriers to begin blending their GPS handset location data with their network-based data at different benchmarks between January of 2012 and January of 2019. Also, based on work that was done by the previous CSRIC, by CSRIC 3, and their recommendations that were made in their March report from 2012, they made two recommendations. One included certain key performance indicators and different types of empirical testing as part of a recommended maintenance testing every 2 years. So based on that information, the working group will examine whether or not the recommendations made by the previous CSRIC still make sense, whether or not they still are effective, whether or not there are any changes necessary in the testing recommendations, and recommend cost-efficient measures to meet the current location accuracy parameters that are in Section 20.18. Also, the working group will examine the capabilities of voice over LTE configured networks to provide enhanced location capabilities, and also consider methodologies to resolve the differences in opinions on location performance and yield that were referred to in the CSRIC 3 report. This objective will be met by December of 2014. And the last objective of our working group has to do with indoor location accuracy and the specifications for an indoor location accuracy test bed. Again, going back to the work that was done by CSRIC 3 in its indoor location test bed report, Working Group 3 of CSRIC 3 recommended that the Commission charter further stages of a test bed in order to continue the assessment of current and evolving location technologies. That group found that several cycles of testing at regular intervals are needed to support the rate of technology development, and that a test bed management structure with contractual authority will encourage ongoing technology development. So based on that information, the working group will examine the requirements to establish a permanent entity to design, develop, and manage an ongoing test bed for indoor location technologies that can provide the FCC with regular, unbiased, and comprehensive data. The working group will consider several different things, including chartering requirements, prerequisites for impartial test bed administration and maintenance of data confidentiality, the types of identities that could assume that role, technical requirements, the scope and scale of necessary facilities locations, permanent or contracted human resources to manage that test bed, the cost requirements to maintain it, and other considerations that might be necessary to establish an independent testing administrator. And this group will be done with its charge by June of 2014. Right.
Great. Now, if you think it's just Lori and I having all this fun, it's not. There are 62 members in Working Group 1. And since the slide was produced, there are 2 more who identified interest in working in this working group. We have divided into subgroups, cleverly named subgroup 1, 2, and 3. And in the subgroup 1, the text to 911, there are approximately 37 individuals participating in that. 26 who are participating in subgroup 2, dealing with location accuracy and testing for voice over LTE networks. And subgroup 3, 27 folks are involved in the specifications for indoor location accuracy testbed. And there are obviously folks who will be participating in more than one subgroup. The members represent certainly the carrier industry, public safety 911, local, state, federal government representatives, national professional organizations for carriers and public safety, location information technology companies, public safety consultant companies. In order to accommodate everybody's interests, we have kind of staggered and overlaid our working group calls so that if you're interested in working groups, you should be able to participate in the working group conference call. We do this on an every other week basis. So that's the group, if you will, that's tackling the issues that Lori and I first identified.
Thank you. Next slide. Just to, as we've mentioned, the work that we're doing now is largely based on the work that was previously done by CSRIC 3, particularly Working Group 3, and that was really groundbreaking work in terms of indoor location accuracy. That group did an amazing job and took it upon themselves to build a test bed and to do the testing. This was just, information on this slide provided to you as background information in terms of where our work came from. This first bullet is the charge that was made to Working Group 3 to explore and make recommendations on methodologies for leveraging commercial location-based services for 911 location determination and provide recommendations on the feasibility and appropriateness to adopt operational benchmarks that will allow consumers to evaluate their carrier's ability to provide accurate location information. So that was their charge, and as I said, they went about the process of actually putting together and building a test bed, doing the tests, and they found that the diversity of location technologies reviewed showed continual advances, and the work group recommended an established test bed trial and evaluated 3 different technologies in the process of doing those trials. They also, as was mentioned before, found that several cycles of testing at regular intervals are recommended to support the rate of technology development. Ergo, the work that this group will be doing to establish the requirements for a permanent test bed, so that work can move forward.
Great. Next slide is the working group status. As I've already indicated, we have 62 members divided in 3 working groups. You have an opportunity to participate in all working group activities. The kickoff meetings have already occurred. I think even all 3 subgroups have either had their calls. I know we've been participating in 2 of them. I think the 3rd one is actually scheduled theirs to begin working. The approach that we're engaging in is the use of case studies, subject matter expert discussions. We do all of our meetings via conference calls, And at this time, of course, we are not planning any in-person meetings. This usually happens toward the end of the process as we go through working on documents. All right.
In terms of the schedule, that
Next slide,
moving
please.
forward, frankly, each subgroup has established its own schedule, working backwards from their deadlines to make sure that they allow enough time to accomplish the tasks that have been assigned to them. Also, we have people who have stepped forward to chair each of those subgroups. We've broken it up into actually 4 because our first objective, that being text to 911, it actually has 2 smaller tasks. So we have 4 people that have stepped forward as subgroup chairs, and we coordinate efforts with them once a month as well to make sure that everything is going okay and that they don't need additional support. Obviously, Brian and I participate in the monthly steering committee calls as well, and we have established the deadlines, again, working backwards from the deadlines for the reports to this body. And those reports will be made in March, June, and December of next year. So in terms of next steps, we will execute our work plan. We will continue to refine the membership roster. I know that that's a little bit of a moving target. We will continue with the weekly, biweekly, and monthly calls and provide status updates to the steering committee and to the council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? All right. With that, we'll move on to the next presentation, Wireless Emergency Alerts, Brian Joseph and John Madden.
Can folks hear me okay? Okay. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to update the working group, the full CSRIC, on the progress that we've made so far on the Wireless Emergency Alerts Working Group. We refer to it shorthand as WEA. I will send apologies from John Madden. He is up in Alaska. He apologizes for not being able to make it. He is meeting right now with about a dozen agencies, coordinating recovery efforts from 5 typhoons that they've experienced in the last several days and weeks. So he sends his regards. He has been very active with the working group and the representatives from your companies. I also want to thank those around the table who have been part of the Wireless Emergency Alerts Working Group. You and your subject matter experts have really shown a tremendous amount of dedication and commitment and then absolute expertise in these matters. If we could go to the first substantive slide, please. So we are, I'll just go over the charge of the WEA working group. We are looking at the FCC's rules, looking at lessons learned since deployment in April 2012 of the initial WEA system. So we're looking at the experiences of those industry participants, the carriers who are disseminating alerts, our federal government partners, FEMA, who operates the Federal Gateway, and certainly the now 226 federal, state, territory, and local alert originators who are authorized to send alerts through WEA. We're also examining technological advances that have occurred since the last time the advisory committee in 2007 took a look at the capabilities and designed the architecture and the ultimate WEA service, and then other factors as appropriate. And our charge here is to develop recommendations for the FCC's consideration, help inform new rules, any changes to rules that might be appropriate for the evolution of the WEA service. If we could go to the next slide. So in discussing with the FCC, we agreed that the working group should really engage on examination of a number of issues: education, geographic targeting, testing, device settings for different alerts, different types of alerts, message content and character limitation, the possibility for other potential types of WEA alerts, accessibility of WEA alerts to those with disabilities and non-English speakers, and then certainly security issues. I'll talk in a minute about the priority items that the FCC has asked the group to focus on. Those included geographic targeting, message content and character limitation, as well as testing and testing protocols. So I spoke a moment ago, if we could go to the next slide, about technological issues. Certainly that is part and parcel of the discussions we are having. But we are looking at more than just the underlying technical issues and technology issues alone. Issues with regard to consumer reaction, consumer responses to receiving these wireless emergency alerts, alert originator participation, the needs of the alert originator community, are central to the discussions that we've had. We've had Francisco and we've had others, and John, certainly from the Alaska Department of Homeland Security, our colleagues at FEMA, really providing some important insights into those discussions. But also, want to make sure that we don't have over-alert, have alert fatigue, where people end up ignoring the alerts or worse, opting out of receiving these imminent threat alerts. And so we're studying the lessons learned. We're looking at the success stories. We're looking where, from the alert originator community, from the consumer community, there are some questions. There are opportunities to evolve and enhance the WIA alerts that are being sent today. If we could go to the next slide. We have presently 28 members. They come from a diverse set of backgrounds and interests. We have those from the alert originator community, as I just mentioned. We have our federal government WIA partners. We have a number of technology vendor companies who are participating, a number of broadcast community participants, and then those on the carrier side, wireless industry participants. And these are folks who have worked through these issues. They have been participating directly with the development and deployment and implementation of WIA, those who have experience on the emergency alert service side as well. So we focused our initial meetings with stakeholder presentations. We heard detailed presentations from NOAA, National Weather Service. We heard from FEMA, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which sends the Amber Alerts through WIA. We've heard from a carrier, and then we heard from Department of Homeland Security, who has been engaged in some research, some funded research and studies based on consumer responses and alert originator needs as well. So, had some good level-setting discussions in those presentations, and also a real expose of where the strengths lie in the WIA service as is currently deployed, and then where there are opportunities to evolve that service. So a lot of good questions, a lot of good discussion taking place from those presentations. And from those presentations, we launched into our discussions in sub-working groups. And if we could go to the next slide, I'll talk about kind of what we've been doing and in what sub-working groups. So we've held calls really on a near weekly basis. It's primarily been a weekly basis, but for the federal government shutdown and the holidays that have intervened. And so we've set about our addressing our two top priority issues from the FCC, which were addressing testing recommendations and then geographic targeting, message content, and character limitations. So these groups have now broken up. We probably have about 18 to 19 people in each of the sub-working groups, and they're meeting. They are very cognizant of our desire to deliver recommendations in those areas for the March 2014 meeting. And so we're working back with a fairly aggressive schedule to delve into the issues and come up with recommendations. And so just a few words on each of the two working groups. So to date, the groups have assembled. They have co-chairs who are heading those sub-working groups. And on the testing side, it's looking at what are the testing issues to be identified. What are the needs that have been expressed from the alert originator community with regard to their desire for testing? So some have indicated we want to send a test message to educate the public that these alerts could go out via cell phone. And we're also looking at kind of the functionality. Some who are saying, we want to make sure that this works. We want to understand how these alerts will be disseminated in what geographic areas. So these are all valid issues to be addressed, and I think it's helping the sub-working group get a sense of the scope of the needs of the alert originators. On the other hand, there's also the concern about the responses from consumers. There's been a recognition by the working group that WIA alerts received on a personal device are much more intrusive, and so what we don't want to see is over-alerting via testing, causing people to opt out. We've covered the existing FCC rules that address required monthly tests. We've talked about multi-jurisdictional areas and the complexities that raises with test messages that could be sent. We've talked about the ability for consumers and for emergency management associations to opt in to receiving test messages, so they wouldn't go out to the entirety of that geographic area and alert the public with a test message, but they could be received on a control number of handsets for those who opt in. And we've talked about potential for improper usage of the WIA alerts, sending live WIA alerts, but indicating that this is a test. And that's something that the standards, the protocols do not allow for, but there aren't necessarily those safeguards in place today. So that testing sub-working group is delving into a number of those issues. Shifting to the second sub-working group on geographic targeting, message content, and character limitation. WIA alerts are sent using a cell broadcast, a point-to-multipoint technology. We're looking at the current cell broadcast geotargeting capabilities. Right now, the FCC rules require that geotargeting be to at least a county level. I think it's fair to say, it's accurate to say that the largest wireless carriers geotarget to a sub-county level, but it does vary when you get more granular. We've talked about cell broadcast character lengths. Right now, it's a 90 character message. We've talked about the potential for these alerts going to 140 messages, or we've had a discussion from the DHS-sponsored research to date with regard to potential for 1,300 characters. And length can be an advantage, it can be a disadvantage, and weighing those pros and cons is something that the group is delving into. Looking at the character lengths, the issues and challenges with geotargeting today, and what those capabilities are going forward, and then alert originator capabilities with regard to message content. Again, there are advantages and disadvantages to how much an alert originator can put in such a message. So we're going into those issues, and those will inform the recommendations that working group puts forward. Again, we're shooting for recommendations from that group in March 2014. So if we could move on to the next slide. So as mentioned, March 2014 is the target date for recommendations for consideration by the full CSRIC group. We're aiming to schedule a face-to-face meeting after the new year. We're continuing with our weekly calls of the working group. The working group is then checking in with and reporting to the broader working group. Each of the sub-working groups report, and then we'll be providing our periodic status reports to the CSRIC Steering Committee and then the full CSRIC. Any questions? Okay.
I have to share with you an experience that I had, because when you were talking about all the criteria and the things that you were looking at, last winter we had a couple of blizzards in Colorado, and something happened. We got a bunch of us who were using one wireless carrier all got an alert about the blizzard 24 hours after it had started, and at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I had never heard the sound before, because it was loud and it was scary. And the second time it happened and we all had our sleep disrupted, we were then taught how to turn it off.
Right.
So, really timeliness, we already knew there was a blizzard. It had been going on for 24 hours. To suddenly tell us at 3 o'clock in the morning that there was a blizzard was not timely, and therefore it was incredible.
And that's a great point. And I know that alert originators, we've emphasized the education element for alert originators, and the criteria is an alert going out pursuant to that imminent threat. I know that the National Weather Service has taken a look at blizzard warnings, and they're not necessarily going forward. They're not necessarily going to be a mandatory, always sent out as a WIA alert, but it's at the discretion of the particular NWS field office. But I know that under lessons learned, that's a perfect example of gauging the need to send an alert in the wee hours of the morning,
Yeah.
right? And the consumer reaction.
Yeah, there's
to
nothing that will cause people not to listen to those
Exactly.
alerts than waking them up in the middle of it, unless,
Right.
of course, something's happening at that moment. Then, of
Exactly.
course, you want to know that it's happening. All right. Thank you very much. That was great. Next item on the agenda is the emergency alert system. Larry Walk and Clay Freinwald? I'm here. All right, there you go.
Hi, I'm Larry Walk from NAB. I don't know if Clay, are you on the line? I don't know about your bridge, but no, I don't need his help, but he planned on, maybe he's listening. Oh, okay, great. So I just want to thank the council. Clay and I both think that it's a privilege to be involved and engaged with this process. We're learning a lot, and we hope that we can put together some reports that are very useful to the council. Clay is in Washington State. If we could have our first slide, please. Second slide, please. Thank you. The objectives. The charter sets out some objectives for this working group. Our working group is supposed to develop recommendations for the CSRIC's consideration regarding any actions the FCC should take to improve the emergency alert system, EAS. We really have three somewhat distinct sub-tasks. The first one involves recommending steps regarding the state EAS plans that every state has to submit to the FCC, and that invokes consideration of the state emergency communications councils that are put together to create these state plans. And the FCC has also tasked us with CSRIC has also tasked us with figuring out a way to optimize the EAS system while minimizing the burden on all the stakeholders. Our second task has to do with the security and cybersecurity of the EAS system. And finally, kind of a catch-all, addressing other EAS-related issues as assigned to CSRIC by the FCC, and that has really shaken out to mean issues that are raised in a recent FCC public notice about the first ever nationwide EAS test that occurred in November of 2011, and the operational issues that were raised through that test. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've gathered a large and diverse group of subject matter experts, really from every facet, every kind of stakeholder. We have representatives from the FEMA IPAWS office that work for Damon, National Weather Service, state and local emergency managers, people who run state EAS networks, all of the EAS participants, radio, cable TV, television, satellite TV, satellite radio, EAS equipment manufacturers, and EAS experts and consultants, and people from the public interest and persons with disabilities communities. Next slide, please. We have 42 members at present, and I've been incredibly impressed with how committed and diligent and enthusiastic these people are. They all have regular other jobs, and the time that they've put in, it's really been quite something. If you could skip ahead. Our FCC liaison is David Munson, who I don't know if he's here, but I just want to thank him. He's been really engaged and a terrific resource to all of our committees. I wish Wish your boss was here so I could praise him to him, too. Pass it on. Some of our issues do overlap with CSRIC 2 and CSRIC 3 efforts, and we're taking a look at those reports. For example, CSRIC 2 considered the introduction of the Common Alerting Protocol, and CSRIC 3 naturally considered the implementation of the Common Alerting Protocol. And we're taking a look at those reports and the product of their efforts to make sure that at this stage in the process we are able to improve the EAS and the implementation of CAP. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, like I said, we have three distinct sub-objectives. First one is state EAS plans. Basically, we're going to be recommending improvements for the development and submission of these plans and for the FCC's review. We've kind of adopted a general approach that will hopefully reduce board burdens on the councils and committees that put together these state EAS plans, but will still enable them to provide a simple but accurate and comprehensive description of how EAS alerts are disseminated in every state. And most importantly, something that describes this dissemination in a way that's verifiable in a simple and easy manner by the FCC, either before, during, or after an event. Some of the issues that have come up in the state EAS plan is how to perhaps adopt a model or a template that bifurcates between the federal part of the EAS dissemination network and the state level part of that network, and perhaps a model template that would serve as a model for the federal parts for all of these state plans, while leaving flexibility for the people in the various states who know how the dissemination of the EAS alerts work in their states to make accurate descriptions on a state-by-state basis. We're thinking about online forms to simplify the process, perhaps putting together EAS dissemination maps, although that might turn out to be too complex and kind of a dynamic thing to keep those maps up to date. Next slide, please. We have three co-chairs for that effort. My co-chair, Clay, Rich Parker from Vermont Public Radio, and Richard Rudman, who is a leading EAS expert in California. We pretty much commenced our weekly conference calls on this topic right from the beginning, all the way back to the beginning of September. And our goal, and I think we'll meet it, is to have a final report issued by March 2014. We already have a very rough first draft of a report on this task, so we're well underway on that project. Excuse me. Our second task is the security of the EAS system, basically developing recommendations for the FCC to enhance the security and the cybersecurity of the EAS, try to prevent any more zombie attacks and things like that, just you may have heard of. This group is started about a month ago. We were a little delayed by the government shutdown because we couldn't have our participants from FEMA and from the FCC involved during the shutdown, of course. So we waited until they could be up to speed. But now they are going like gangbusters. Some of they're basically at the point of defining the scope, the terminology of the project. They are working to identify best practices that have been created in the past and working as a baseline off of those that will enhance the integrity and security of the EAS system. One other factor is the upcoming working group number 4 on cybersecurity. I believe that's getting up to speed or being formed now, and we will have to coordinate with that working group so that we don't duplicate any efforts and we figure out a way to complement and supplement each other's work. The general approach on this sub-issue will be just a way to illustrate the security considerations at all stages and links in the overall EAS system, for both the legacy analog EAS system and the digital CAP EAS system. Next slide, please. Our co-chairs here are Ed Zarnecki from Monroe Electronics, who's right there in the sweater vest, and Neil Graves, formerly of IPAWS, FEMA IPAWS, who has come over to the private sector and now works at SNR systems. This group intends to put together some interim reports for the Council's consideration during the 2014 and have a final report done for the December meeting. Next slide, please. Finally, our third committee is addressing the operational issues and the national test. They are examining very closely the public notice that the FCC put out on that first ever nationwide EAS test. The FCC asked about 130 questions in there. I don't think we're going to be answering every single one, but the group has broken them down into kind of 5 major subgroups, and we'll be considering and putting together recommendations for the FCC for steps the FCC can take in that regard. Some of the major issues raised in there include the EAS header elements of a presidential alert, how to deal with visual crawls and audio accessibility for persons with disabilities, how long the national test event code should be, the location of the national test event code, whether it's DC or something nationwide, any additional headers during the alert processing, and finally, FEMA's potential use of CAP for presidential alerts, which I think is kind of a preliminary issue, but we're going to be trying to be proactive and take a look at it. Thank you. Our co-chairs there are Steve Johnson, who is a consultant in the cable industry, and Dan Mettler, who works for Clear Channel Entertainment. And we should have a final report on this issue in time for the June 2014 CSRIC meeting. Next step, like I said, we have kind of 3 distinct tasks, so we're going to have 3 separate reports. Our committees will continue to meet during our regularly scheduled conference calls. We have many members who are on more than one committee, and those folks are really putting in a lot of time. And, depending on where we are in each sub-issues task, they're identifying the scope or the primary issues for each task, or perhaps they're drafting and narrowing things down. And like I said, some of the tasks we've actually begun drafting, and some we're outlining, and some we're just we are mulling over before we start drafting. And as my colleague said, we will also provide periodic reports to the steering committee and the full council. That's it for me. Questions?
Any questions? No? Okay, so I just want to give you all a heads up. We're going to have one more readout of a report, and then we're going to take a 10-minute health break. So let's get a readout from the server-based DDoS attacks from Peter Fonish and Michael Glenn.
Hi, thanks. Hi, I'm Mike Glenn, and Peter Fonish and myself are co-chairing the server-based DDoS attack working group. I would like to just thank Vern Mosley, our FCC liaison. He's done a fabulous job, and I really want to thank him for all the help and work that he's provided for us. And I know he's somewhere. There he is. So thank you. And if we can get the slides up, please. Next slide. So the objective of our working group is really to look at DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks that come from large data centers and hosting sites. And our primary goal here is to look at network-level best practices to mitigate those attacks. Previous working groups looked at residential aspects of this problem, and we're looking at it from a hosting perspective. We will provide recommendations to the council about best practices. And another important goal that we talked about in the group is that we will also look to not only having best practices, but also look at barriers to implementing those best practices. Next slide. Here's a list of our members. We have 47 members on this slide. We have actually probably a couple more. It's probably more closer to 50 members. We have a broad range of people on the committee, from ISPs, banks, hosting providers, nonprofit organizations, security organizations, pure play DDoS companies, a wide range of federal and state people who are on this. And I really want to say I want to thank everyone for participating. We've had a great amount of interest on this particular working group. And, I want to say we truly have some of the world's leading experts on this working group, on this particular problem. And I'm really excited to have those folks engaged. And we have a whole coalition of people who have to deal with these types of attacks day in and day out, both who feel the impact of the attacks and mitigate the attacks on a daily basis. So I'm really excited about this group. Next slide, please. Yeah. We're going to look at several CSRIC working group recommendations from the past, including CSRIC 2 Working Group 8 on ISP network best practices and protections. Next slide. We're going to continue the work from CSRIC 3 Working Group 7, which dealt with this botnet problem, from a residential perspective, and we're now taking it up from a hosting and server perspective. And as part of Working Group 7, they created a barrier to implementation as part of that, and we're continuing that work, as I mentioned before, on barriers around implementation of best practices, so we can try to have practical and reasonable best practices that actually get implemented and deal with this problem. Also, we'll be dealing with, we'll be looking at CSRIC 3 Working Group 4 recommendations. They had a number of recommendations specifically around BGP and DNS that we'll be looking at, and they had very specific recommendations there. And this is just a background slide for everyone who may not be as familiar with this, this problem. And what we have is servers that are compromised under the control of attackers, and they launch attacks from a set of servers. It can either be directly against the victim. It can be against upstream infrastructure that has the same effect of taking the victim offline, their website or their services that they're trying to do. Or they can also bounce the attack off of internet infrastructure to amplify the attack and increase the size of the attack before it reaches the victim. So we'll be looking at all of those cases. We'll be also coordinating with other groups, including MOG, OTA, the Cloud Security Alliance, and the White House Internet Botnet Group. We're focusing on network-level best practices. These other groups are taking different approaches to the problem, but we'll try to look at the work that they're doing and incorporate their ideas and their considerations as we move forward. As far as our approach, we have divided the working group into 4 subgroups right now: an ISP, financial community, an Internet Security Experts working group, and then a best practices working group. We did that for practical reasons. We consulted FCC legal staff as we were looking at developing case studies for this, and we wanted to ensure that we could look at the case studies and look at all of the information, which could contain sensitive information in the case studies, but we could look at that and then have the subgroups summarize that information at an appropriate level to remove that sensitive information before it was brought to the full working group. And that's the reason for the 3 subgroups that are in there. And then finally, the 4th one is a group looking at best practices and also at barriers to those best practices, that we will take the information from all of those working groups, but the main working group will be looking at all of the case studies and be evaluating the best practices around those. There was just some FOIA concerns around the sensitivity of possible case studies, and that's the reason why we broke our approach into this method, to ensure that companies were willing to provide case studies that may have sensitive information and need to look at it. Our status We've had now 5 biweekly conference calls. As I said, we've broken up into 4 subgroups, and at least a couple of those subgroups have already met. We'll be continuing to work, and I think things are going well right now. We've also put together a wiki to consolidate our information. We have mailing lists for both the main working group and the subgroups for communication and coordination, so we're well along in that manner. From a schedule perspective, we're continuing to have biweekly conference calls of the main working group, and then on the off weeks we have the subgroups having meetings on their own. We've scheduled our first face-to-face meeting here in Arlington, the January 8th and 9th, and we intend to have 2 more face-to-face meetings during the course of the working group, probably sometime in April and August. Right now, we have a June 2014 draft report that we're targeting, with a final report in September of 2014, but I do want to say that's a very aggressive schedule, and with the government shutdown, the impact or the schedule could be impacted by that. We have to see the progress we make. If we have another government shutdown, almost surely our schedule will slip. Finally, as far as next steps go, with the on what we're doing, we're developing a template for our case study, so they'll be in a common format. And I want to thank the FSISAC for contributing the draft template for that. We're developing an attack taxonomy around the different types of attacks, and we're going to be using those to standardize and to be able to have a common way of talking about these attacks and looking at what best practices we're able to implement. As attacks occurred, we're going to be looking at what best practices were actually implemented and then look at gaps around those best practices. And also, as I said before, the barriers on why carriers or other providers haven't implemented best practices if they weren't deployed at the time of the attack. With that, let me open up any questions anyone has. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, I've got that it's 2:30, so let's try to get back in our seats at 2:40.
Is there any consideration at all about using spectrum for hours and hours?
Please take your seats. Okay, everyone. Am I on? I'm on. Okay, we're going to take another presentation from another working group, the Long-Term Internet Protocol Improvements. William Check, please. Hopefully he's in the room.
Good afternoon. This is Working Group 6. And first, I'd like to thank Curry and Jacob, our FCC liaison. He's been doing a great job for us, and thank him for his support. If we can go to the next slide, please. So regarding membership of Working Group 6, I'm pleased with the participation that we have. We have a number of different sectors. We have ISPs, financial, vendors, education. It's a pretty broad group, and I think it'll be good for the work we're doing. I will note later we're going to fill this in a little bit more as we move forward, but I'll note that in the next couple of slides. But we have a pretty good group here in terms of members. In terms of the overall status of the group, we have approximately 40 to 42 people, certainly industry experts from across the industry, so it's a good-sized group. And at this point, the scope for the work group is defined, it's agreed upon. And the working groups are going to be comprised of two subgroups. One is on the domain name system, and one is on inter-domain routing, along with IPv6 deployment best practices. And if we can move to the slide 4. So talking a little bit about the subgroup descriptions, we have subgroup chairs for each of these areas. Matt Tooley from NCTA is the subgroup chair for DNS, and Tony Tauber from Comcast is the subgroup chair for the interdomain routing and IPv6. For the DNS side, this group's going to focus on the protocols used to govern the operation of DNS, the domain name system, that are vulnerable to spoofing attacks. And for interdomain routing, we'll focus on the protocols used to govern the operation of the Internet's crucial interdomain routing system that are vulnerable to root hijacking attacks, along with best practices looking at the transition from IPv4 to IPv6. Looking at slide 5, and this is now going to look into the DNS subgroup mission. This is really going to be looking at DNS open resolvers. And a DNS open resolver is really something that resolves the queries from any external location, even if they're not a part of its administrative domain. And in terms of the issues with DNS resolvers, they're frequently the source of DDoS attacks, typically used in DNS amplification attacks. The one that came up recently, earlier this year, was the Spam House incident, which was the spam prevention service in Europe, where they repeatedly had very high levels of congestion. So the mission and the scope of the DNS subteam is really identify and recommend best practices for use looking across the ecosystems. This is going to be ISPs, ASPs, CPE vendors for mitigating issues related to DNS open resolvers. And this is one where I think we're going to augment the group a little bit because we want to bring in some CPE vendors, so someone on the manufacturing side, to the team. So we'll work to fill that in. But the scope of this one really is focused on the open resolvers. And then for moving to slide 6, for interdomain routing and IPv6. With interdomain routing, the problem is not necessarily always subversive. For sometimes there can be naive mistakes that cause interruption of legitimate traffic flows due to misconfiguration. In other cases, it is actually attacks that can be arranged for misdirection of flows, routing the traffic of data via unauthorized networks. In particular, what we're going to be looking at is the recent internet routing hijacking incidents. This is one where the company Renesys identified in a blog they published about some rerouting that occurred. This is where traffic that, for example, was meant to originate in Denver and terminate in Denver, it ended up going from Denver to Ashburn, Virginia, from there to London to Iceland and back to Denver. And of course, the problem with that is when these hijackings occur, you don't know what's happening during the path, whether the traffic's being intercepted or what's happening. So the hijacking incidents are important to look at. And in addition to that, we're also going to be looking at the previous recommendations from CSRIC 3 Working Group 4, which was the predecessor of this group, to determine if any new CSRIC recommendations would be helpful or are needed. And then moving to slide 7. And then as follow-up to that, we're going to be moving into the IPv6 area. And a couple of things going on now in IPv6. One is that I think most people know the available pool of IPv4 addresses is nearing exhaustion. And as that is happening, the IPv6 rollout is accelerating, or we all hope is accelerating. So the group believes that there's certainly some issues to look at in terms of security and reliability and interoperability of IPv6, and to explain potential issues and deployment recommendations to address them. Now, I do want to emphasize, as we're talking about IPv6, the first order of business for this subgroup is really on the BGP issues and the address routing hijacking issues, so that's going to be the first order of business for the group. And then as time goes by, we'll see how that goes to pick up on the IPv6 things. And then finally on slide 8, so where we are right now in terms of next steps, we have the subgroups formed, we have the leads assigned to the subgroups. We're scheduling the subgroup calls now. Our full group will meet every 2 months. The subgroups are going to meet on a more frequent basis, approximately every 2 weeks. We're targeting now for March for an interim report from the DNS subgroup, and then also in March for an interim report from the BGP IPv6 subgroup. We'll see how that goes, but that's what our targets are for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Okay. All right. Next item is legacy best practice updates. Kyle Malady. Excuse me? Oh, Kevin.
He's not here.
Okay.
It's the last.
Sorry.
No, it's not. It's okay.
Kevin Gooding.
Greed. Kevin Greed.
Okay. Kevin Greed.
Right here. Waiting for the mic.
There you
Okay.
are.
Thank you for having us at the full CSRIC. My name is Kevin Green. I'm filling in for Kyle Malady. I'm also with Verizon. Kyle regretfully was not able to be here with us today. So the charter for Working Group 7, Legacy Best Practices Update, is focused on considering best practices that have not been looked at since CSRIC 2. The working group is going to review these best practices, do some gap analysis. Because of the changes in technology, some best practices may not be useful anymore. There may be areas where best practices need to be developed, and so they'll be focusing on that particular area. Also, the working group is going to consider some best practices that were proposed by ADIS and recommend how best to incorporate those best practices and changes into the wider body of best practices. And also we have a new item that is focused on the security of manholes. FCC staff has asked that the group take a look at how to develop best practices related to that, as well as trying to determine the best ways to quickly recover from any manhole type incidents. Next slide, please. So the current objectives, September 2014, the group is intending to complete this gap analysis of the existing legacy best practices, identify where additional practices may be necessary, and then recommend changes to that base of best practices. As mentioned before, they'll also consider those ADIS best practices, and that's all due in September of 2014. In March of 2014, the FCC has asked us to work on this issue related to security of manholes. I'll talk a little bit about that in a further slide. And then in March of 2015, there will be recommended revisions to the best practice prioritization based on CSRIC 2 Working Group 6 recommended process. And I'll touch on that also. Next slide. So there's a list of the current members. The group is not very large, but they are very committed. So we appreciate the work that has been accomplished already. We have a number of experts in the construction of best practices, so we think that this working group will be able to complete its task. Next slide. So schedule and status. 476 best practices have been selected in the areas of network reliability, physical security, disaster recovery, and mutual aid. And along with the 16 best practices that ADIS has provided. Also, we need to finish this manhole security review, and the status best practices that is due in March 2015 will involve prioritizing all of the best practices, putting them in the areas of critical, highly important, or important. So the working group has been broken out into 4 sub-teams. As mentioned, each sub-team has a best practice expert. We have folks who have previously done best practices with ADIS, as well as other CSRICs, previous CSRICs, all the way back to NRIC. So we have a strong group. All members have been trained on structure and design of best practices, and the subgroups are meeting as a group bi-monthly. Next slide. Schedule and status. We've developed review guidelines, and that's really to help the group stay on track and stay focused on meeting the objectives. And there's a checklist that has been developed to ensure that there's consistency in the development of these best practices. As mentioned before, the bi-monthly meetings are for progress and also to escalate any issues that can be resolved in the subgroups. In addition, there's a peer sub-team review process, so each group will look at the other group's work to just evaluate it and do an extra check on it. As to the ADIS and RSC best practices, the entire working group was going to review those and comment on the referred best practices, and that review will be included in the 2014 final report. So issue overview. This manhole security issue was given to us by the FCC recently, and in recent years there have been a number of events associated with damage in manholes, primarily due to vandals entering and cutting the fiber cables or doing other kind of damage to the manhole, so to the facilities in the manhole. And so the working group's going to take a look at this issue, try to determine if there are existing best practices that can be applied to this particular problem, or possibly creating best practices specifically focused on manhole security. We'll also need to consider non-best practices, because many of the owners of manholes are not related to the communications industry. You have other utilities and consortiums that own and operate manholes, so we'd like to be able to provide them with some information as well, because it's not a problem that the telecom industry will be able to solve by itself. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the next steps, we're going to continue working on best practices by sub-teams. We'll work the manhole security issue as a parallel effort, perform gap analysis and document recommendations, and review those ADIS recommendations on best practices.
Thank you, Kevin. Any questions? All right. Next item, submarine cable landing sites. Kent Bressy.
Thank you, Larissa. Do we have the slides? Great, thank you. This working group 8, is the new kid on the block. This is a set of issues that the CSRIC has not looked at previously, but it's a very timely one, as there have been an increasing number of conflicts and coordination problems between installed and planned submarine cables and other marine activities, including energy facilities and most recently dredging projects after Hurricane Sandy, both with the dredging for sand and the actual beach replenishment activities off the coast of New York and New Jersey. We've had issues with the Army Corps and its subcontractors and Suffolk County and Long Island looking to dredge directly over undersea cables or looking to anchor barges essentially next to or on top of installed undersea cables. The Army Corps, of course, has issued permits for these facilities, but apparently forgotten about where they are or not made contractors aware. So there are a lot of coordination problems within the federal government itself, different agencies not aware of what other agencies are doing, in addition to the industries themselves, which have traditionally relied on private contractual arrangements to try to coordinate those activities, but particularly with the development of alternative energy facilities, those mechanisms either don't have a history because the industries are new or they're not working as well. So there is definitely a need for the development of industry best practices, and I would call them inter-industry best practices as well, government policies and interagency coordination mechanisms to address some of these concerns. And ultimately this matters because submarine cables are the international infrastructure of the Internet. They carry more than 99% of U.S. international data, voice, and Internet communications. It's not about satellites, although a lot of people outside the communications world don't understand that. So it really is a matter of protecting the continuity of communications and the resilience of networks. And so we're going to be looking through the operation of our working group, which is going to function as one unit, not as subgroups, to address these issues and come up with the best practices, the recommended coordination mechanisms, and some recommended standards for spatial arrangement of facilities and activities. And these are going to take the form of 3 reports. Unfortunately, I'm skipping around a little bit here. If we could skip forward, there we are. Originally, this was conceived as 2 reports, but in talking with our working group members, we're now going to focus on 3 and break this into 3 parts. The first is going to focus on recommended approaches for spatial separation of submarine cables from other offshore activities or infrastructure. And this will depend in part on the facilities and activities at issue, and also the seabed and marine conditions. So in some cases, it might be possible to come up with a specific spatial distance that is recommended for a particular activity. In other cases, it might be a process. We're also going to be looking at other alternatives to something, or at alternatives to a pure spatial separation distance. Other countries have created cable protection zones or exclusion zones. Those of Australia and New Zealand are the most advanced. And there are also network architecture solutions as well, which focus less on protecting the infrastructure, but ensuring the continuity of communications through mesh networking. So that's a completely different model from spatial separation for maintaining the continuity of communications. The second report is going to focus on the gaps, conflicts, and sources of delay with existing interagency coordination and offshore permitting mechanisms. And it's going to look at recommending mechanisms for improving that process. And here the FCC is but one player, but I think one that can be very influential in this process. So we're pleased to be working toward recommendations that the CSRIC can consider and then recommend to the FCC, and feeding that into the continuing interagency process, whether it's with the National Ocean Council, which is coordinated by OSTP in the White House, or through other bilateral MOU-type approaches with other agencies. For example, NOAA and the Commerce Department and some of the energy regulatory agencies already have MOUs in place, but there is nothing like that involving the FCC. The third report is going to focus on industry best practices and government policies for promoting geographic diversity of submarine cables and cable landings. And it's going to build upon the first two reports and looking at factors that contribute to the clustering, because if you look at a map of installed undersea cables in the United States, they tend to land in a few places. Some of that is due to geography and topography of the coast and the seabed. A lot of it is due to the permitting regimes of individual states and localities. So those are the three key parts. In terms of our membership, we now have approximately 20 members, which is almost double the number that we had from the September meeting. So we've had a lot of interest from industry participants and also other government agencies. And we view that as critical for having a meaningful discussion and drafting of these reports. So our approach, which I've outlined before, is within the working group, and we're working principally electronically and telephonically because our members are scattered throughout the United States, and we actually have one outside the United States, but is to identify what the relevant risks are, what the activities at issue are, the other agencies. And part of the exercise is educating some of our working group members who have a background with other industries or other government agencies, but not necessarily with submarine cables, and helping to bring them up to speed so that they can contribute in a more meaningful way. So we're going to be trying to leverage a lot of existing information that exists regarding submarine cables and installation maintenance issues, spacing standards, those kinds of things. But a lot of that information has been pretty self-contained within the submarine cable industry. And so we're going to be looking to make that more readily available. In terms of our status, I already noted that we have about 20 members. We're meeting biweekly or tri-weekly. We have now agreed on a draft work plan, which we are proceeding to execute, and we're very much focused on developing those three particular reports. For the first two reports, some of the tasks we can work on in parallel. The working group has appointed task leaders for those individual work plan elements and has commenced the scoping and information gathering. Again, because we have a pretty heterogeneous group of working group members, we didn't think it particularly workable to try to break out into a bunch of subgroups because we really need almost all the participants focused in all of our discussions. So in terms of our timing, we are still aiming for the submission of the first report in June 2014. This is on spacing issues. On interagency coordination, originally this was going to be part of the first report. We need to discuss further within the steering committee about, and this is going to depend in part on what else the CSRIC is considering at other meetings, but when we think it might be possible to present that report and when it might work timing-wise for the full CSRIC. And then the third report on geographic diversity we're looking to finalize in March 2015. So in terms of our next steps, I think I've already covered most of these key matters. Just as I was sitting here this afternoon, our SharePoint site for our working group, which my firm is hosting, went live. So that will greatly assist us as we're gathering a lot of voluminous and memory-intensive information, so that we're not always having to trade that by email. So we have a very energized group of working group members from a variety of backgrounds. They're very pleased that the FCC is interested in these issues and willing to devote a lot of time to executing these reports, which I think are quite ambitious, but I think we have sufficient commitment to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Kent. Okay, next item, infrastructure sharing during emergencies. Jay Nalon? Sorry.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jay Nalon, and beyond just being the National Director of Operations, Planning and Support for T-Mobile, I'm also the chair of Working Group 9. And I'm grateful and humbled for this opportunity to serve in this capacity. If we can go to the first slide. So many of you are probably already aware of the objectives of Working Group 9. But for those of you who are new or just curious about or need a reminder of our objectives, you can get most of it in our name, which is infrastructure sharing during emergencies. So whether it's a natural or man-made disaster, the outcomes are pretty much the same, very similar, and that's widespread commercial power outages and transport failures causing widespread outages in wireless networks. So what our working group is doing, or attempting to do, is to focus on ways to leverage communication networks, backup power solutions, fuel, and other critical resources in an effort to create a more resilient communications network across the country, and especially in those well-known disaster-prone areas. So in the following slides, we'll talk about our approach to this, some of the things that we've accomplished, and what we hope to accomplish in the next couple months. So we can go to the next slide. And as I mentioned previously, large-scale disasters can and do often cause widespread network outages caused by commercial power failures. And although the power outages are not the only cause of failure, they are the primary cause and the biggest effect or impactor. So that's what we focused on primarily. Secondly, we're going to focus on the transport. So there are several approaches to address these events, these disaster events. And one is just hardening the networks. And hardening the network can be done through whether that's battery backup, power backup, generators, fuel cells, or whatever it may be. But we can also look at mobilizing generators and cows, which are cell on wheels. Or, I'm sorry, next slide. This is, no, I think we went through forward one too many. There you go, thanks. So it's the deploying of the cows and the colts, and the cows being the cell on wheels, and the colts being the cell sites on light trucks. But as you can imagine, in the pictures you can see, to deploy those assets, it's very difficult, logistically challenging in the middle of a disaster or in an area that's been impacted by a disaster. So just getting a generator to a cell site or getting fuel into a region can be very, very difficult. And so what we'll talk about is how we're going to address that. But there are other things that we can do beyond just hardening the network. There's our response. We're going to focus on how we can streamline our responses. We're going to focus on our roaming capabilities, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today. And ways to streamline that. So what we're going to talk about next is our approach. So thank you. What we decided to do, just based on the scope of this project, was to first divide up into three areas. And the areas that we divided up into were the wireless carriers, or the network solutions, the backhaul and transport, and then finally the backup power. So once we've been split into our three subcommittees, we wanted to focus on short-term and long-term objectives and opportunities that would allow us to share and leverage our infrastructure. And so where are we today? So go to the next slide and we'll talk about that. So we have accomplished quite a bit in the short amount of time that we've been working. The first thing that we did was we established the three subcommittees and have identified subcommittee co-chairs or subcommittee co-chairs, which are highlighted in blue, and I'm not sure if you can see that in here, so I'll just read off their names. And I'd first like to thank these folks who stepped forward and for their efforts, and I would say that they're brave individuals for stepping forward, because there's a lot of passion and perspectives that we get to navigate through. But first we have Eric Woody from Union Wireless and Ernie Gallo from Addis, from Ericsson representing Addis, also in the room today, heading up the wireless networks. We have Richard Zeno from Sprint and Cindy Perez, who's also in the room from Cat 5, heading up the backup power subcommittee. And then finally we have Joan Vaughn from T-Mobile and Catherine Condello from CenturyLink, heading up the transport subcommittees. Next slides. Let's talk about what we've done in our subcommittees. So now that we're split up into our groups, we threw out a lot of ideas of what we should be focusing on. We had over 50 ideas that we wanted to potentially investigate. And as you can imagine, it was too much to manage. We probably would not make as much of an impact in 50 areas as we could if we were to focus on, say, 8, the 8 that you see in front of you. But these 8 are still pretty substantial. They're very substantial. The scope of them is going to take a lot of effort and energy to get some reasonable output from them. But in reality, these 8, as you see, they'll get to the meat of what we're trying to accomplish here. So we look at first the wireless networks. We'll be working on a roaming during disasters process guide. I'm going to talk about that in just a few moments. But we're not looking forward to just putting together our typical best practices, which we will have. We'll have best practices surrounding roaming during disasters. But we wanted to go a step further and develop a process guide, something that would help streamline the carriers and all those that are supporting this effort to perhaps enable roaming a little bit quicker than we have in the past. Excuse me. And we'll also work on resource sharing best practices and long-term looking towards more of an interoperability standards from that working group. And not determining what those standards should be, but raising the questions of what standards should be focused on and perhaps getting those to the right bodies that could focus on them. Next, we have the backup power. So the backup power is going to be focused on just that, backup power. How do we harden our networks? Right? Rather than attempting to boil the ocean, how can we make meaningful impacts and movement towards hardening or developing a hardened network across the country? So we'll be looking at best practices surrounding site prioritization, focusing on sites that we would need to harden, focusing on sites that would provide a minimum level of coverage within an impacted area, and working from there. Ultimately, or alternatively, we'll be looking at other sources of energy, whether that's fuel cells advancement, solar, wind, whatever it may be, or those things that we're not even sure are out there yet. We'll be investigating those and trying to bring those to the table. And then in the transport, we'll be focusing on the last mile. So the last mile has changed over time. It's also becoming more IP-based as well. So we need to look at the vulnerability of that and do a high-level vulnerability study of why are transport facilities failing during disasters. Is it caused by power or is it other physical damage? We'll also investigate microwave possibilities. Now, this would be licensed or perhaps spread spectrum radios, third parties providing services and what that might look like to come up with some ideas and potential solutions there. And then ultimately, from a long-term perspective, we're looking at sharing transport and how would that happen? What would govern that? Would we be using dark fiber or other solutions? So with that, I wanted to focus a little bit more on, before we move to the next slide, there's a little teaser there. Before we move on to this next slide, which actually jumps into the document that I wanted to cover, I wanted to set the stage a little bit to help you understand who would use this document and why and how they would use it. So it's the disaster. It's the roaming during a disaster guide. So if you can imagine, and it's not hard for any of us here in the room to imagine an earthquake or, well, let's even say a hurricane coming through the East Coast that devastated multiple states, that knocked out commercial power for days, in some instances greater than 5 days. It's a widespread commercial power failure. And after about 4 to 8 hours of battery backup being depleted, you're going to start seeing a lot of cell sites failing. So the carriers are doing several things. They're assessing the damage of their own networks. They're looking to how do we get fuel and generators, if they haven't already done so, into the area and planning the logistics to deploy those assets. But in the background, there's something else that's occurring. You have other people that are looking at whose networks are up, what networks are available. Can my customers roam on those other networks? And there's limitations to which customers can roam on which networks. And it's based upon the customer's handsets, whether they're the right technology. Will a CDMA phone work on a GSM network? Depends on the chipset that's in the phone. It depends on what spectrum and what frequency. There are some limitations, and so there's some background that needs to take place. But once you've identified a potential source of a roaming partner that you want to reach out to, who are you going to reach out to? Do you have that contact? Are they readily available? Do they know who you are, and do they have the time to take your call? So these are the things that take time in the background. As you can imagine, if that happens on the weekend or in the middle of the night, that becomes even more difficult. And when they're in the middle of recovering an event, it's even more difficult. So to have a lot of this outlined prior to entering into an event can streamline this process. And that process that I was talking about, after you've established the proper communications and connected the right people that can make the decisions, that have the correct authority to enable such a roaming agreement, then the technical aspect starts. We need to start gathering the technical capabilities, considering billing, existing agreements, etc. So that takes time. It could take days to get a roaming agreement established and put into place and enabled. And in an event like this, we want this to happen not in days, but as fast as possible. And so this document we're about to see will actually address that. And so this is going a little bit further than what we anticipated with developing best practices is the document. Now, when you look at the Roaming During Disaster Guide, the table of contents, it's not completely built out, and this is what we hope to accomplish in the next couple months. It indicates that perhaps 24-page document. In reality, it's going to be a much larger document than 24 pages. It's going to approach somewhere between 50 and 100 pages based upon the roaming matrix that you're about to see, as well as the process documents that would support how do you contact who and who would you contact internally. But beyond that, it's going to suggest some considerations such as legal, thresholds, billing. But if we move to and look at the roaming matrix, it's a little bit hard to see from here, but if you can trust me, this document is on the left side. It's broken out into a region, and then it's broken out from a region. This particular region is a northeast region. Then it's broken out into states, and then it could be broke out into counties or perhaps the borough level. What we've decided after a lot of consideration was to take a step back. That was a little bit too deep right now. We don't have the bandwidth and the time to develop a document that extensive. But if we focused on the 50 states and provided this matrix for the 50 states, it would allow us to have a snapshot of who's available to roam on at any time in any geographic area. So if you take this across the board, we're starting with New York, or the Northeast region, New York, and we look at the carriers that are listed. You'd see AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint, and Verizon. We would have the list of the rest of the carriers there. And then if you follow it across, you would see what technologies they have available. Is it GSM? Is it LTE? Is it UMTS? Is it CDMA, EVDO? Whatever it may be, and they would have a dot indicating where that's at. It would also indicate their frequency. So in this particular example, in the event that we talked about, the hurricane coming through, we could quickly reference this document, take a look at, we're impacted in New York. If I'm T-Mobile, who I am, I would want to see who else is available that I could potentially roam on. And this would lead me directly to AT&T, who also has GSM 1900 available. Now, where do I go from there? This is the next step. If we flip to we'll stay on this slide, I'm sorry. Look to the right side of this slide. This is the contacts list that's also part of this document. What you'll see here is 3 people identified within T-Mobile. And we would ask for 3 people within each company, within each of the carriers. Myself, one of my senior managers who handles disaster recovery, and then a third party yet to be determined. But there's also the 4th option over there, which is the 800 number to our NOC. We would request the same similar information. It's open 24/7. They would be given the process to contact who, in case they were contacted in the middle of the night or on the weekend. So from there, we get the correct parties established, and then the question is, what do we do next? And if you go to the next slide, it would talk about this is an internal process flow that we would want to establish within each company. Now, whether we publish this or not, it can be discussed later. But this would be T-Mobile's internal workflow. If we were to get a request from AT&T to roam on our network, it would follow a very simple, not as simple, as you can see, it's quite complex, process to identify what do we do, how do we do it, who do we get permissions from, and what should we consider. But by putting all of these in place, having a document that's full of critical information such as this, and a way to step through it, we believe that we can actually take something that takes days today and reduce it to half a day or perhaps even hours to get implemented. So this is one example of an area that we're focused on and building out. We think that we could have it done by March, but we don't want to stop here. There's some other areas that we also want to focus on. Most of the other short-term deliverables. In fact, we'd like to go to a level maybe not to this depth, but similar levels, and produce working documents that can be fruitful. There is the how do we govern it going forward? Where would this reside? Would it sit with perhaps Addis or someone? We don't know. That's something we'd have to continue to vet out. But this is where we're at. If we want to look at where we're going, we have our subcommittees. They're meeting weekly, bi-weekly, depending on their schedule and the workload. Some subcommittees are a little bit busier than others right now. Next week, we'll have the Power Subcommittee meeting here in D.C. to talk about how do we identify opportunities or best practices around leveraging carriers, getting together, developing a forum to talk about hardening and getting the right people in the same room. From January through March, we're going to continue to develop the short-term deliverables, complete the user guide here for roaming, and then have a more of a readout on the roaming guide by March, and then in March. And then from March through, you can go to the next slide, through September, we'll complete, hopefully, all of the short-term objectives that we've identified and as many of the long-term objectives that we can. We'll identify the roadmap beyond 2014, and ultimately, from October through December, we would look at formalizing and compiling all this in a comprehensive document, white paper format that we'd present to the council. And I think that brings me to the end. So are there any questions, comments? Very good. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jay. All right, last but not least, CPE Powering, Brian Allen and Tim Walden. We're looking for power.
Why don't you hold your card up?
There we go. Great, thank you. So appreciate the time, and we're always happy to be last before closing remarks. You don't have to put us first, but we'll be quick. So you can go to the second slide, and the focus of our working group is on power management relating to consumer VoIP services and the ability to make and receive emergency calls during interruptions of commercial power services. There are two deliverables. One is recommend consumer outreach and communication strategies for making users aware of backup power features in their home adapters. And second, to recommend best practices for powering consumer devices during commercial power failure or interruption. Next slide. We have representatives from the comm sector, from providers and manufacturers, as well as industry groups. And the American Consumer Group recently has joined us. We struggled a little bit in trying to pull our team together, so it's taken us a little bit of time. We've had one introductory meeting, and if you can go to the next slide. We had our first in-person and conference call today, this morning. So, a lot of the information you'll get today, we can update on the slides if needed. Jeff, just let us know. The first person meeting that we had some representatives at stake, and really what we want to do is put some focus and some guidance around how we're going to approach this and the topic itself. So we've decided to break out into two sub-working groups. The first one with recommending consumer outreach and communication strategies. I'll just give you some guidelines of some of the topics that we discovered and had some conversation about, and that will provide some framework for future conversation. So some of the content that will be addressed is, one, an understanding of the VoIP service technologies, the differences between the changing environment, as well as how voice is an application versus a standalone network, and some of those perceptions. Two, understanding the communication network interruptions, and so power interruptions versus communication infrastructure interruptions, and the differences that they can bear on the interruption of VoIP services. Three, who is the audience? Is it residential, business class? Should we be providing special considerations for the population with disabilities? And so all of those areas will be addressed. The focus is going to be on residential and some of the population with disabilities, and then I think the scope of that will broaden as the conversation continues. Powering alternatives and what CPEs need to be considered. So what steps need to be considered for preparation for preparation, pre-event, and post-event considerations. I think we had quite a bit of dialogue about some of the supporting technologies and equipment, not just routers and modems, but also what other devices are customers using to support VoIP services, and so providing them with a toolbox or considerations to have an understanding of what it is that needs to be powered within their home. So what services do they want covered also? So emergency communications, both being able to make calls and receive calls, but is there other types of services that they would be interested as well? The ability to receive emergency communications through video. So building that into a toolbox for them. How long and do they want to? Would they want and do they need services to be operational? Providing considerations for implementation, and how are we going to get these messages out? So is it going to be through trade organizations? Obviously, the communications sector will provide some guidance. Would we use social media, email, bill stuffers, installation materials, guidance, and training for technicians? And potentially providing manufacturer recommendations for other CPE equipment. We'll look at other materials that have been put together post-Sandy. We've seen some materials from Pennsylvania PUC, several commissions from New York City, New Jersey, and upstate New York have put some materials out for post-Sandy recommendations that have touched on this topic, but I don't think they've gotten very specific. But we'll take a dive at those materials as well as DHS's ready.gov that is widely distributed and making recommendations to provide some content and guidance for consumers there. The second deliverable, recommending best practices and alternatives for powering consumer devices during commercial power interruption. One, an understanding, again, of the types of equipment and the needs to be powered and for how long. To what alternatives are available to meet powering needs, generator, battery, UPS, and what proactive measures can communication companies take as well. So customer education on equipment, reference materials for industry specifications, and considerations for remote battery diagnostic capabilities. So you can go to next steps. By the end of this week, we'll have established our sub-working groups. We have the leaders in place already. The sub-working groups will be meeting bi-weekly, and the overall working groups will be meeting monthly. Our deliverables, the outreach deliverable was set for March in 2014, and best practices for alternative powering we have set for September 2014. I think we had some really nice dialogue today for about 3 hours, and hope that we'll continue. Thank you.
You had a question? All right.
One question for the day.
Awesome. Go ahead.
All right. I really appreciate your presentation. And as I was thinking about the efforts of FirstNet and the public safety community that may be partnering with commercial networks, and trying to think if there's any applicability of what your group is working on that would be beneficial to the public safety CPE in a commercial public safety partnership such as FirstNet. So maybe that's something you can kind of file in the back of your mind as you develop these reports, that there may be some applicability that go beyond just the commercial residential consumer.
Sure, that's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Brian. All right, well, in closing, I think that's it on the calendar today. In closing, I want to thank everybody. Those are really great reports. I personally learned a lot, and it's clear that there's a lot of enthusiasm and commitment from everyone in the room and all the working groups, all the people that are putting everything together. And again, I thank you for that. I think we've got a really productive next couple of years ahead of us. So thank you all. Have a good day. And did you want to officially adjourn?
Let me just adjourn the meeting. But first of all, I'll say that the last time I will ever announce that the CSRIC meeting is going to probably end early. Regardless of what I think, I will never proclaim it. Okay, if I do, please let me know. Everybody, thank you for coming. Have a warm, happy holiday season and a safe trip home. We'll see you in March.